Okay, shalom everyone. I'm very, very happy to have been able to speak to Lori for about 5 minutes. Uh, I'm hoping that Lori will be with us every week, no excuses. And Aaron was a good trooper to tape in Lori's absence. But the problem is Aaron tapes and forgets about posting it on YouTube. So I said to Aaron, please, try to post. The problem is Aaron is now working harder than ever in his military service. I really cannot pressure him too much. Everything here in Israel, as always, is the quiet before the storm. We have a number of things we are contending with. As you all know, we are in the process of getting back some of our live and some of our dead hostages from from uh, from Gaza. Um, to give you a short summary of my personal opinion, I did support a deal with Hamas. It's a deal with the devil, but I did support the deal with Hamas, and luckily we've gotten back about 24 people. On Thursday, we're supposed to get back 4 bodies. These would be the first bodies coming back. There are like 35 dead people who we have to get back, for burial. And I think we're getting 3 more live hostages on Saturday and another 3 live the following Saturday. And then we have to see what happens with the second stage of the hostage agreement, the hostage return agreement. And the demands that Gaza is making are so extreme that they think what we're demanding is extreme, and it is. We're demanding that the Gaza terrorists disarm and disappear and go somewhere else. I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little later. I think that President Trump has a very good idea. In my personal opinion, I'm very surprised not to hear anything about 2 countries, which I think would be excellent to receive 1.5 million Gaza refugees. One is Malaysia and one is Indonesia. And I will talk about that in a few minutes. But Trump has the right idea. We cannot tolerate a terrorist state in Gaza. So, Trump said, well, if, the gates of hell will open if they don't release everyone tomorrow, kind of a thing. And here in the Middle East, we don't have what you have in America, which is called fast foods. Here, the food is very slow to prepare. It doesn't always come out tasty. So we have to be a little more patient if we really, really want to see our people alive, coming home alive. So I do support the agreement as long as we don't give up our critical, our strategic requirements for Israel to survive. But I think it's a given, and we've heard this from a lot of Arab countries, that they are all fed up with Gaza. They want Gaza out. They want something else that, they don't want their people expelled, or transferred out of Gaza. But I think there's really no choice, because the education or the miseducation that the Gaza children receive is just to kill Jews. That's the only thing they are interested in. I heard there was one incident where a school class, were so indoctrinated that the kids had problem falling asleep, and they said, because we can't sleep until we go and kill all the Jews. And this is something we hear from the media all the time, that these kids are totally turned into potential murderers. It's not a type of people that we can live with. Maybe I'll talk about Indonesia and Malaysia now. One of the problems that we face, we have to send these Gaza Arabs to a country which has no Jews. Malaysia and Indonesia have relatively no Jews. Indonesia has 20 Jews. Because if there are any Jews in the countries where we send them to, they will go and kill the Jews. So, for example, we cannot think about sending the Gaza terrorists to the U.S. or Canada or Mexico or Latin America or even Europe. Wherever there are Jews, they will be targeted for death. So if they go to Indonesia, which is a very rich country, very powerful country, or to Malaysia, Malaysia has many, many minorities, but it's also a big country. It's a bunch of islands. Indonesia has many, many empty islands. They have water, they have palm trees, fertile land. There's no reason why 1 million or 1.5 million Muslim terrorists from Gaza cannot just go and live somewhere where they cannot do damage, or at least they are limited in their ability to do damage to Jews and Christians and others. Maybe Malaysia is not so good because you have Hindus and Buddhists and Christians. And, I would say that Gaza people look for them and kill them too. But Indonesia is the biggest Muslim country in the world. There are 200 million Sunni Muslims there. And like I said before, I'm sure the Indonesian government, with the right, how shall I say, the right bribes from the United States, can take in these people and put them in 1 or 2 or 3 islands where they can have their federation inside of Indonesia. And they're all Sunni Muslims. They can build all the mosques they want and do whatever they want and not bother the Jews or the Christians or the Hindus or the Buddhists. And the Indonesian government would keep a very good eye on them. Another thing also is, from the global perspective, China is a threat to a number of countries, including Indonesia. China is a threat to Japan, to South Korea, to Taiwan, to Vietnam. Believe it or not, Vietnam is an ally of the U.S. now. The Philippines, these are all pro-American countries. And by the way, so is Indonesia. And so I think that the United States would emphasize to the Indonesians that they can profit financially, and they can also profit militarily if they take in these Muslim terrorists from Gaza, put them in a semi-isolated area where it's not really possible for them to go and attack other Muslims in Indonesia. And Indonesia probably would be, word is slipping from my mouth, compensated. They would be compensated by the U.S. and maybe some of the Muslim countries. It would be excellent, I think, for the Gaza Arabs. The problem in Gaza, and President Trump hit the nail on the head. If the Gaza Arabs remain there, the war will be in perpetuity. And as a good businessman, Trump wants Gaza completely demolition, completely erased, so that everything can be rebuilt in a proper way. And I don't know if you heard this in the news in the United States, but the Prime Minister of India, Modi, has a dream to have what the Chinese want to do, like a Silk Road belt. And that they are hoping that they will be able to connect with the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, and then straight into Europe with the product from India. And Israel, of course, would be a critical part, or shall I say more correctly, the reconstructed Gaza would provide a port for all these goods, for all this commerce from India to go into Europe and back and forth. And President Trump would stand to make billions, if not trillions of dollars, if he owns Gaza. One of the things also that we are not talking about in the media is that there is a growing sign that Egypt is going to attack. And actually, my son Aaron said this at the very beginning of the war with Gaza, October 7th, He said, Daddy, I'm because I think that Egypt will join the battle after Israel has been totally weakened by the war, weakened by Gaza, by Lebanon, by Syria, by Iran, by the Houthis. Um, we really don't need a war with Egypt. And we have a peace agreement with them. Why would Egypt attack us? And I think one of the reasons is because of the disturbances from the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt that Assisi wants to deflect these disturbances away from the Egyptian government and blame everything on Israel. And what easier way is there than to say, well, Israel wants to depopulate Gaza, let's go to war with Israel. So we're watching Egypt very carefully. Turkey is another country which is actually drawing itself closer to Egypt. So we're very afraid of a war breaking out with Egypt and Turkey, which are countries which have no reason to attack Israel unless they've made a strategic decision to attack Israel. I think that if President Trump brings about a new situation in Gaza in which not American troops necessarily, but American interests will be built up in Gaza, this will dissuade the Egyptians and the Turks from attacking Israel. Unfortunately, Islam, in spite of what everyone says, that Islam is a religion of peace, there are too many people in Islam who hate Israel and are seeking our destruction. And by the way, they also seek the destruction of the Christians. So I would like to say I wish I could be unemployed, but I will never be unemployed with this Islam mentality of killing Jews and Christians and Hindus and Buddhists and blacks and other people. So, hey, listen, as long as God keeps me alive, I'm going to keep fighting. And if you listen to the things I'm saying, then wonderful. Then you're with me, I'm with you. This war is not going to be a short war. We're going to attack Iran in a very short time. We're going to be attacking Iran. And I think that President Trump will really deserve a Nobel Peace Prize when the Iranian regime is overthrown and the people of Iran can resist and get up and say, we want democracy in Iran. Most of the young Iranians, most of the population of Iran know nothing about the Shah. They are totally opposed to the Ayatollah regime. And so I see great potential with Iran. The Iranian people love Israel. Many of them are very anti-Islamic. There are many Iranians who say that Islam took over and destroyed Iran from within. And so the Iranians want to go back to their original religion, which was pagan, but they were very friendly with the Jews always. So we'll see what happens with Iran. We're waiting. I think we're waiting for the hostage business to be over. And when it's over, when we get all our people home, alive or dead, but get all our people home, we will be ready for let the gates of hell open up for Gaza and get the people out of there. You know, the Gaza terrorists, get them out. Let President Trump do the miracles that I know he can do in Gaza. Get the trade route opened up between India and Europe, going through Gaza, going through Israel. This could be a time of great prosperity for Israel, for the Arab countries, for Saudi, for many countries. I see a great visionary in President Trump, but the only way to be able to deal with the terrorists is to destroy them. And this is what President Trump wants to do. We're with him. I mean, you know, our leadership, if anybody in Israel would come and say, you know, expel the Gazans, they'd be thrown in jail by the left-wing Supreme Court. What we are very afraid of a coup d'etat, a military and left-wing overthrow of Prime Minister Netanyahu. So we are very quiet. There are no riots in the streets from the right-wing Jews like myself, but the left wing is constantly inciting to violence. We do have to watch very closely what the left is doing. There are many former generals in the Israeli army who are raking in millions and billions of dollars from the Qataris. Qatar is an enemy. There's no doubt about that. And Netanyahu has to walk between the drops, as they say. He has to prepare Israel for the future. If there are people who don't like the future, according to Netanyahu, hey, we're the majority. We're 70% of the vote. And yet the Supreme Court represents about 10% of the vote. So we're going to have to see how we can save Israel from our left-wing dictatorship, which is still controlling the judiciary and the military and the police and the civil service. I think you all know I was fired from the Prime Minister's office in 1990 because I was a member of the Likud under Prime Minister Shamir. And when they fired me, they said, "We know your political views, you're fired." And this is something that has been going on for 100 years in the land of Israel, in spite of the fact that the right wing and the religious are growing and growing and growing, and the left wing are shrinking. So, I'm changing the subject, but the Bible Bloc Party, I believe, is the answer. And so it took me 11 years to register the party, to pay the lawyers, to pay the government, all the things that had to be paid. We ran in 5 elections. Unfortunately, we only got 400 votes in every election, and most of these people were just Messianics. So what we have to do now is reach out, and it's not easy to reach out without money. But we have Ethiopians who speak Amharic. We have Russian speakers. We have Arabic speakers. We have Hebrew speakers. We have English speakers. We have Spanish speakers. And I believe that, and I've spoken about this on these Zooms, I believe we're going to be seeing millions of Jews and Christians moving to Israel from the US, Canada, Latin America, Europe. I think our population is going to double. So I believe if I'm still alive by then, the Bible Bloc Party will be the biggest party in the Israeli political system because half our population will be immigrants. And this is according to what I've been speaking about, that there's a great danger to the Jewish people and their Christian spouses and families living outside of Israel. So I'm watching that very closely. And like I said before, we are still surrounded by countries with military capabilities that want to destroy us, other than Turkey and Egypt. I mean, Lebanon is still ready to have another war with us, even though the Lebanese government doesn't want a war, but the Hezbollah does because they're mentally construed in the same way as Hamas. Syria has been overthrown, and instead of Shiite terrorists, we now have Sunni ISIS terrorists. They are a threat to the Christians in Damascus. They are a threat to the Druze in Damascus and in the south of Syria. The Kurds, who are 35% of Syria, do not have their own state. 25% of Turkey is Kurdish. You have the same situation in Iraq, same situation in Iran. Altogether, 40 to 50 million Kurds in those 4 countries. And so I believe that Israel has a great ally, potentially with the Kurds. So we're watching that also. So that's the situation today in the Middle East. The Houthis will resume launching missiles at us if and when the fighting resumes with Gaza, open the gates of hell. The Houthis will definitely start shooting missiles again. So I am glad that the boycott, the embargo of the Biden administration has been overturned by the Trump administration. We are getting the weapons that were promised to us, that we paid for, and we hope to get these weapons. We're getting some of them. We got a very big shipment yesterday. So now it's just a question of getting everything plugged in and get it ready for the war with Iran and maybe with the countries surrounding us. Jordan knows that they're dependent on us for their survival. Egypt should know, but it seems Egypt has some kind of a pharaonic monkey wrench in their brains. Saudi Arabia stands to make a lot of money, even though I think that money doesn't really interest them, because if they have to give up their Islamic plans to destroy Israel, which I think they have, they really don't want peace. So that's Saudi Arabia. So we're watching to see how things are going. But like in 1948-49, when we were invaded by 7 Arab countries, nobody believed, especially the State Department, did not believe we would survive it. Today, we are surrounded again by 7 enemies and more are ready to attack us. Nobody believes we can withstand all these attacks. And honestly, our troops are very weary from all this fighting, weary from being mobilized all the time. A lot of our troops need a break, and there is no break. We don't have soldiers. And the ultra-Orthodox young men don't want to serve in the army because the rabbis are telling them not to. So there has to be a solution for the rabbis. There has to be a way to convince the rabbis that all young Israelis should be in the military. There are also many left-wing young men that don't serve in the military. They go to psychiatrists, pay 1,000 shekels, and get a letter that they're crazy, and then the army doesn't draft them. So the draft dodgers are ultra-Orthodox, and the draft dodgers are left-wing socialists. But like I've said many times on the Zooms, 70% of our people are modern religious or nationalist, secular but nationalist, and I'm somewhere in the middle there. And we're strong, but it's a miracle from God, a gift from God, that Trump won the elections. And I'm proud to say that I and my son Aaron and my other son Yaakov, we voted 3 times, 2016, 2020, 2024. And we believe just as Netanyahu is the right man in the right place at the right time for Israel, Trump is the right man in the right place at the right time for America. And I think that's how God works. I'm hoping, just praying and asking all of you to pray for Netanyahu and to pray for Trump, that no evil hand will touch them. Other than that, I think I've covered the opening part of the message. If there's anyone who wants to ask a question or whatever, I'm here at least for another half hour for you guys. So if you want to say something, unmute and ask.
Avi, I'm interested in more information of, I know you touched on Egypt and what's going on there, but like the people of Egypt, what their thoughts are, and the preparations there for what might be going and why, and their thoughts on taking in Gazans, and just a lot more about Egypt, if you could.
Sure. Well, Lori, you've met my wife, Rachel. Rachel was born in Egypt. She left Egypt at age 20. Her father was imprisoned in jail in Egypt for 2 years, like all Jewish men. They were interrogated, they were tortured. And these are just simple human beings who love Egypt and wanted to stay in Egypt. My father-in-law, rest in peace, never had any intention of leaving Egypt. And but the terror of the jails and then the expulsion, my father-in-law was expelled from Egypt. He was put on a plane with handcuffs, and only when the plane was ready to take off, they released the handcuffs. He had to swear on an affidavit that he gave up all his property in Egypt. So Rachel and her mom and her brothers and sisters, they grew up with it. There is a deep-seated religious hatred against the Jews and the Christians. You know what? I want to give you, I imagine you'll appreciate this, Lori. Egypt was kind of like the United States 100 years ago. Egypt had opened up the Suez Canal. There was great prosperity, great commerce in Egypt. You had many, in addition to the Jews, you had many Greeks, Italians, Frenchmen, British, who were all expats. They were all living in Egypt, working very hard. They were an essential part of the Egyptian economy. They made good money. And it was really, it was a pleasure to live in Egypt. My wife said, 1948 began the trouble with Israel and with Jewish people. But there were many who left, but there were those who said we're staying. My wife's family was the last group to leave Egypt. But don't forget, in the early 1950s, when Abdel Nasser became the president of Egypt, he expelled all of the Greeks. The Greeks had a tremendous economic influence on Egypt. All these Christian Greeks were kicked out. Their businesses, their properties were taken over by the Egyptian government, confiscated. The Italians, the French, the British, all kicked out. By the way, if you look back to 1956, the Sinai campaign, the Suez Canal campaign, France and England and Israel were allies in a war against Egypt. And they won. But then Eisenhower came in and said, no, give back the canal and get out. And so the British and the French were forced to leave completely. Many more Jews fled. This is the next wave of Jewish people who left Egypt. And the last wave was the 1967 war Jewish people. Today, Egypt is a country which has Coptic Christians that go back 2,000 years. But all the other foreign entities, including the Jews, do not exist anymore. The Egyptian people are reproducing and multiplying in such numbers that the Egyptian economy cannot keep up with it. There is a lot of unhappiness with the government. The government never is able to keep up with this completely out of control birth rate. One of the great fears, and this is promoted by the mosques, is that Egypt must become a fanatic Muslim country. And al-Sisi is a Muslim, I would say a devout Muslim, but he and all the other military people understand this is not good for Egypt. Abdel Nasser himself was a Muslim, and he put in jail thousands and thousands of Muslim Brotherhood terrorists. They're like the Gaza terrorists. And what we have today is that the Egyptian government is very afraid of the terrorism that is radiated to the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt by Gaza. Another problem I haven't really spoken about is that Ethiopia has built a dam on the Blue Nile. And this dam is very important for Ethiopia. Unfortunately, though, it stops a lot of the flow of the Blue Nile into the White Nile, which then goes to the Aswan Dam. The Egyptians have stationed a tremendous amount of their air force and their military in Somalia. And the idea of that is that if that a war could break out between Ethiopia and Egypt if the Egyptians do not have their demands met by the Ethiopians. I don't know if you get any of this in your media in the States, but to give you a little story that spins off of this, I'm a stamp collector, And so I know about these things because I collect the stamps. I know the history of every country. There used to be a country which today is part of Somalia, and it was called Somaliland, and it was controlled by the Italians during World War II. And then it was united with Somalia. But the people of Somaliland are they are pro-Ethiopian and anti-Egyptian, whereas Somalia is an ally of Egypt. So this business with the dam affects Ethiopia and Somalia. Israel is a close friend of Ethiopia, as you all know, King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. I mean, this is real history. This is not a joke. We are very close to the Ethiopians, even though they're Christians, very good friends with them. And so we are watching very carefully. We have our intelligence everywhere. We know exactly what the Egyptians are planning. And the Egyptians are not afraid of losing a few million people in a war because their population is so out of control. A war with Israel would divert the dissension of the Egyptian people against the regime. And if you know your history, going back 3,000, 4,000 years, one of the classic problems in Egypt is invasions and wars and blaming everything on the Jews, the Hebrews or others, the Hittites. The Egyptians have this overbearing demand for weapons. They can't afford these weapons, but the American military-industrial complex is selling them weapons. But it's not the American military-industrial complex only. The English are selling weapons, Germans are selling weapons, the French are selling weapons, Russia is selling weapons. Money is not a factor here. But the Egyptian economy is collapsing. The Egyptian economy is not doing well. The Houthis in Yemen, by launching rockets at ships in the Red Sea or in the Arabian Sea, the Persian Gulf, have caused a lot of the international maritime traffic to be diverted around the Horn of Africa. So Egypt has lost billions of dollars in transit fees for ships that were going through the Suez Canal. I would say that the Egyptians should have actually done a lot more against the Houthis. Why is it that the Israelis have to attack the Houthis, or the British and American fleets? Why do they have to attack the Houthis? The Egyptians would be doing something. And instead, they're preparing to attack Israel, which is their ally. Don't forget also that Israel allowed the Egyptian military to come into the Sinai Peninsula to fight ISIS. And Israel provided military and intelligence information to the Egyptian military to fight ISIS. And we allowed them to bring in tanks and planes. And what has happened is they have increased the amount of their tanks and planes and infantry. And according to the peace agreement, they should all be pulled out, and they refused to pull out. So all I can say is welcome President Trump, welcome the 51st state of Gaza, completely demolish it, level everything, and then rebuild it according to the plan of President Trump. 1.5 million refugees can easily be resettled in Indonesia. Don't forget, in the civil war in Syria, 7 million Syrians were displaced. Nobody said anything. Now many of them are coming back to Syria because they're Sunnis. And the Shiite regime of Bashar al-Assad has been defeated. By the way, I have to tell you a little story that got me into a lot of trouble with the Israeli army. During the civil war in Syria, the Shiites were slaughtering the Sunnis. Now, it wasn't just the Shiites. It was Shiites, Christians, Druze, and Kurds. were killing the Sunnis because the Sunnis were 80% of the population. And but they were slaughtered. They were exiled. I'm telling you, 7 million Sunnis had to flee. So the president of Egypt said in 2000, I think in 2011, 2014, he said, you know, we're going to support the Sunnis in their war against the Shiites. And Iran, which is a Shiite state, said, we are going to nuke the Aswan Dam. Now, if you nuke the Aswan Dam and all that water goes rushing down the Nile Valley, you will see the fulfillment of Ezekiel 29, which is that the whole country is flooded. It will be impassable. It will be unlivable. And I spoke about a nuclear bomb being dropped on the Aswan Dam, and I got court-martialed because you're not allowed, as an Israeli army spokesman, to talk about nuclear weapons. And I gave them proof in the Israeli army that this wasn't Avi Lipkin speaking. This is what Egyptians and Iranians and Syrians were all talking about: a major religious war between Sunnis and Shia. So there is a lot of tension with Egypt. The Egyptians have a lot of tension with Ethiopia. They have a lot of tension with Syria, maybe a little less now. They have a lot of tension with the Houthis in Yemen. They have a lot of tension with Israel. So it's not a simple situation with Egypt. And like I said before, the population time bomb is ticking away in Egypt. They do not stop reproducing children. And the mosques do not stop inciting against Jews and Christians. You know, I will conclude the question, the answer to you, Lori, with the famous joke about the camel and the scorpion. It's called the joke of the Middle East. And the story is that I mean, stop me if you know the joke, but a camel can swim. It's like a horse. It can ford a river. And there was a camel that wanted to cross the Nile River, and there was a scorpion right next to him and said, hey, listen, I'm a scorpion. I don't know how to swim. Take me across on your back, and I'll be very appreciative if you take me across on your back. And the camel said to the scorpion, yeah, but you're a scorpion. It's in your nature to sting me, and then I'll die. And you yourself, you know, said that it isn't logical to sting me because then you'll die also because you don't know how to swim. And so anyway, so the scorpion said, okay, I'll get on your back. They start swimming together across the Nile River. And sure enough, the scorpion all of a sudden stings the camel. And the camel says, you know what? I'm going to die now in the middle of the Nile River. And you're going to die also. And you yourself said it's not logical to sting me. And so the scorpion answered, so what's logical in the Middle East? Anyway, I don't know how many of you.
Good point. Good point. So what Egypt is doing in Sinai right now is in violation of the peace agreement with Israel, right?
So what?
Yeah.
What are agreements in Islam? Agreements are made to be broken if it's perceived by Egypt that it's in the interest of Egypt. They break it. They break the agreement. You know, I have to tell you, Laurie, and you know me, not from yesterday. You know me quite a while, and I've spoken about this. Egypt attacked Israel during its independence, 48, 49. We had the Sinai campaign in 56. We had the 67 war, the Six-Day War, all this with Egypt. We had a war that nobody talks about called the War of Attrition from 68 to 70. We had a war in 73, the Yom Kippur War. And we have a peace agreement all these years since 1973. The peace agreement withstood many challenges, but count the number of wars that Israel has gotten into with Egypt. So 48, 56, 67, 68 to 70, 73, 5 wars. And we took Sinai 3 times from the Egyptians. And the president of the United States each time made us give it back. So it was Truman in 49, it was Eisenhower in 56, and then Jimmy Carter, with the peace agreement. I don't like Jimmy Carter's memory, but actually the peace agreement was good for Israel. We received 2 million immigrants within a very short time. We went from 3 million to 5 million population. Peace is good for immigration. Today we're up to 7.5 million Jews and Christians. I think we're going to have a lot more very soon. But, and I've said this many times in churches, if Egypt attacks us again, this is the last time we're going to take Sinai. Because we're going to take it and it will be part of the biblical border from the Nile to the Euphrates. And when I talk about the Kurds, I'm talking about an alliance with them all the way up to the Euphrates. So everyone thinks I'm crazy. I say, yeah, I'm crazy. God's crazy also. God has a plan. God does things that he's doing, that he has planned. And who can withstand God? But Egypt is walking on very thin ice. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
By the way, I have to tell you, Lori, something very new. I don't know if anything will come of it, but I've started writing for an African magazine I think it's in Tanzania. And they're very Zionist. They're very pro-Israel. And they want me to get more and more involved with Africa. And I see that as a challenge because in Africa, it's either China or nothing. The Chinese are very active in Africa. There are many people in Africa who would really like to see a greater Israeli presence in Africa. We have many Ethiopians in our country who are the best people, wonderful people. And they would literally provide great ambassadors from Israel to the countries in Africa. I think President Trump, he's talking about the Chinese threat to the Panama Canal, to Venezuela, to Colombia, to all the countries in South America. The Chinese are heavily invested in Latin American countries. And the bottom line is a threat to America. So, I'm always looking at the American angle to my Israeli plans and the plans of the Bible Bloc Party, especially if we have 6 million Jews and 4 million Christians moving to Israel. Anyway, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but as long as I can live and contribute, that's what I'm going to do. Questions, challenge me.
Any thoughts on Putin and Zelensky?
Well, all I can say is that is very, very complicated. One of the things I will say is that you have to learn to expect the unexpected in the Middle East, and you have to learn to expect the unexpected in Russia. And even though I was a Sovietologist and I studied communism and socialism and Russia and the history of Russia and the history of many, many things, the Berlin Wall came down. I didn't have a clue. And I think that when President Reagan, of blessed memory, said, bring down that wall, nobody realized just how fast communism would collapse, just how fast the Soviet Union would come apart. The borders would be changed. New countries would be created. And Ukraine is one of them. So I don't want to say that I support Ukraine more than I support Russia. But I think Putin made a great mistake killing 1 million of his soldiers in a useless war. And also killing 300,000 Ukrainian men and women. By the way, the women in Ukraine also are mobilized to fight. So we're talking about almost 1.5 million people dying in a war which should never have happened. We have a saying in Hebrew: you'll attract more, I don't want to say flies, but with sugar than with vinegar. And the approach of the Russian government under Putin is vinegar. And you can accomplish a lot more with love and with fraternal cooperation between the Ukrainians and the Russians, and not this constant Russian boot coming down on the neck of the Ukrainians. And I've spoken about this on the Zooms many times, that they never had the Magna Carta like the West has had in 1215. By the way, Magna Carta is not just a British thing; it's an American thing. It's a Western democracy thing. Russians never had that. Russia has always been autocratic, a dictatorship. And the famous German philosopher Heinrich Heine said 200 years ago, the world is going to have to choose between the tyrannism and despotism of Russia. 20 years ago, he said this. Tyranny and despotism of Russia and the foolishness of the Americans. Who wins? The foolishness of the Americans. Why? Because the Americans are foolish in the Lord. And if you're foolish in the Lord, you're always going to win. I always share that in the churches. I get a great response, by the way, but it's true. American greatness, exceptionalism comes out of its foolishness, because God guides America. And when God is not guiding America, I don't want to think.
Avi, I have a question going back to the hostage situation.
Yeah.
Because there's really no incentive for Hamas to release the hostages. I mean, we're saying that once we have them all back, they will never again be ruling in Gaza. So what kind of pressure is being applied to them that would encourage them to even release any hostages, whether they were alive or dead?
I would say it's a stalling campaign. Hamas is stalling and stalling and stalling. And you're right. The moment the hostages roll back, the gates of hell will open up, as President Trump very correctly said. There are a lot of people, this was before the war, October 7th, there were a lot of people from Gaza, 40% wanted to emigrate. This is before the war. What's left of Gaza? Nothing's left. And eventually, the chickens are going to come home to roost. I mean, the people of Gaza, firstly, I believe half of them will leave of their own free will. So little by little, Hamas will be weaker and weaker and weaker. And when people understand that the best thing for them is just to get out and go to Indonesia or something. And the Indonesians are Muslims. And it'll be good for Indonesia to have this extra population if there's any Muslims. So I think that it's a win-win for the U.S. and Israel. But the problem is that many Arab countries, including Egypt, potentially, will want to have a war with Israel over this, even though the Egyptians don't want to help the Gaza Arabs at all.
Do you think that the United States is prepared to financially compensate Malaysia and Indonesia for taking in the refugees, if they do decide to do that?
I want to ask you a question. Jews always answer a question with a question. Do you think that Indonesia can stand up to China by itself?
No.
Indonesia needs the U.S., and Indonesia is an ally of the U.S. And Indonesia controls so much oil that the Chinese are after.
Oh, so it's a win-win situation.
Yeah, it's a win-win situation for Gaza people to get out of that hellhole, and
Yeah,
it's a win-win for the Indonesian or the Malaysian governments. It's a win-win for the West. You know,
right.
The Japanese who were the enemy. I grew up with World War II. Let me tell you, I was born in '49, but I watched all the war movies from World War II. Today, the Japanese are the best friends of the United States, but the Japanese are alone. South Korea is alone. They feel alone. Taiwan is alone. Indonesia is in the same category, and so is Philippines, so is Vietnam. So I think what we're looking at is a grand alliance of many countries against China if China wants to push for a war.
But do you think that they're strong enough in Indonesia and Malaysia um, to overcome any kind of insurgence of Hamas there?
Hamas is 1 million, 1.5 million. Indonesia is 2.5. There's 200 million Muslims.
So you think they'd be able to kind of just nip that in the bud if it were
Yeah,
to rise up?
sure. It's not a democratic government. It's a dictatorship in
Oh,
Islam.
okay. Oh, right up their alley.
So that would, work. I think it would work. I
Yeah.
don't know. I don't know what Trump has up his sleeve. He's talking about Albania and he's talking about Kosovo and he's talking about other countries. The small countries will be overwhelmed by jihad terrorists from Gaza. No, they have to go to a country with such a massive Muslim population and such a very small Jewish population, virtually non-existent. Only 20 people in Indonesia, because the Indonesians hate the Jews too.
So we should just bring them home, bring them back to Israel as the Gazans are, you know, being
Listen,
sent there.
I have to tell you something, and I'm not going to be a racist against my own people, but Jews have always been a wandering nation, and every country you go to, you find Jewish people. There's another joke: wherever you throw a rock, you find a Chabad rabbi. You've heard of Chabad,
Yes.
and the Chabad people are saints. They do wonderful work, but every time I go to Chabad, I say to them, listen, your job should be moving to Israel. And they say, well, no, but the Rebbe told us to spread out all over the world. So you're saying bring the Jews home. My worst enemy is Chabad. I mean, I love them. They're great people. They're good to me
Yeah.
too. But I don't see eye to eye with them. I have to tell you a little story. I very frequently, I won't say what city, but I travel throughout the United States, and there's a rabbi of Chabad who's very much alone. He doesn't even want a police car near his Chabad house. And I said to him, listen, do you have a gun? He said, no, Hashem is protecting us. And so I said to him, yeah, that's what they said in Europe in 1938 also, that Hashem was protecting the Jews. The Germans would never do anything to them. And now they're saying the same thing about the Muslims. But I don't know if you remember, you heard about the rabbi and his wife in Bombay, in Mumbai, in India.
Yes,
Got
unfortunately.
slaughtered by, I don't want to say what else they did to them. So I took the wife of the rabbi, who I love very much, secretly away from her husband. I said, listen, don't listen to your husband. Go buy a pistol. You have to have a pistol for your self-defense. And she was kind of dumbfounded that she would ever dare to do anything without her husband's permission. I said, you have to be able to defend yourself. So I don't know. Listen, I love the Chabad. They are saints. But they have the same mentality as the Jews in Europe in 1938. So you go to Indonesia. I am sure that the 20 Jews who live in Indonesia are super, super rich. They go to Israel, and then, who are they? Nobody looks at them. But in Indonesia, they're very rich. There are a lot of Jews who go to places where no right-thinking Jew should ever go. But they go and they make tremendous amounts of money. You have countries in Africa, for example, developing countries. I'll say, for example, South Sudan, a new country. And the Jews and the Israelis are very active helping develop their economies. But these are not democratic countries. These countries are prone to revolutions and rebellions, and many times Jews get killed. So you cannot tell Jews to give up their income. Listen, I'm not comparing. But for the last 35 years, I could not make a living here in Israel. Where did I go? I went to the Christians in America. So I feel like Joseph was expelled from the Holy Land by his brethren, and he went to the Egyptians. I go to the modern day Egyptians, who are the Americans. And I'm blessed. I built a house here in Israel. I'm running for office. These are things I could not do without having gone to the Christians. I was making in Israel, in the prime minister's office, I was making like $300, $400 a month. And they fired me. Everyone said, why are you sticking on to that job? Get out of there, because they hate you. They're left-wing socialists, and you're right-wing Likud. They were right. So, if God shuts all the windows and doors except for one, you go through the one that's open. And that was the Christian world. And Lori Bond and her father, rest in peace, and her mother are typical examples of deep, devoted Christians who have been helping me for 35 years.
Baruch Hashem.
Baruch Hashem. Also, I'm not messianic, but I do believe in messianic. That's supposed to be.
We're right at the 1 hour mark. Avi, do you think that's about it?
If nobody, we'll start with a stopwatch, 30 seconds. If nobody has a question, then we will call it a day. I imagine you're so busy with your business and everything you're doing, so. Any questions? Last moment before we conclude for this week.
Thank you so much for your commitment to bring these very detailed and informing reports.
You know what? I live for this. A little group of 20 Christians came to Israel. I spoke to them 2 nights ago, and they said to me also, thank you. I said to them, listen, I've been here in Israel 2 years without the ability to travel because of the war, and you Christians are like oxygen, fresh air for me, that I can do what God created me to do, which is to give lectures.
Thank you, Avi.
Thank you, Annette. Okay, my love to all of you, and until we meet again, happy trails.
See you next
Same
week.
to you.
Thank you.
Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.